Welcome back to another episode of Dev in the Details, the show where we're going to dive deep into all things AI and building tech startups here in the Silicon Valley. Today I have a special guest, Varun Badhwar. Varun, like me, started his first company when he was 26 years old, but he started in cybersecurity. His second company, RedLock, was acquired by Palo Alto Networks, the world's largest cybersecurity company, for several hundred millions of dollars. And at Palo Alto, he was general manager for Prisma Cloud, its newest cloud security offering that competed directly over time with Wiz, which he grew from really zero to over $1 billion run rate business. Varun left Palo Alto a few years ago to start his next venture called Endor Labs, a code security company used in-house by all sorts of native AI companies like Cursor, OpenAI, and even us here at Rubrik. I think maybe his most impressive achievement, he's also my brother-in-law. I think Varun's uniquely positioned to not just talk about building startups, scaling businesses post M&A, but also some of the most unique challenges we're seeing in AI today with its number one use case, which is around coding. So Varun, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here. I just want to make a slight correction. I know you want to feel like you kept up with me. I started my first company when I was 25, not 26. But anyway, who's counting?
Got it. Okay. Well, the first company versus the second. Well, I guess we'll have to keep a scoreboard. So actually, tell me a little bit about that first company. I remember RedLock the early days, and I often find that people think that a startup at the early days has this novel insight, something that someone picked up, nobody else saw. What I think actually happens in practice is you learn a novel insight after you've been grinding out for some weeks, months, years. What was the novel insight at the core of RedLock that actually made it a successful business?
Yeah, look, I've been fortunate that all the companies I've built have been catching a wave of tectonic shifts in technology. With RedLock, obviously the thing was in everybody's face, which was you no longer needed to build in data centers when AWS and the other hyperscalers had incredible infrastructure available for you to just click and start building. But the unique insight was that the security architecture and paradigm was going to fundamentally shift. The pace at which people could make mistakes was going to fundamentally shift. The unfortunate reality of being in cyber, though, is while I can sit here and predict how things are going to go in the future, sometimes the markets, the buyers, the users of these technologies take a little bit longer. Like right now, nobody wants to talk about how insecure the code generated with AI is. And, we'll get to that in a minute when we talk about Endor. But that's not the conversation. The conversation is shipping fast. And it was the same thing in 2015 with RedLock, which was everybody was switching on infrastructure with a click of a button. It was completely decentralized. You no longer had IT teams and network teams and firewall teams having kind of checks and balances on what infrastructure was getting built. And so for us, the question was quite basic, actually. Can I give you reasonable visibility into what's getting deployed in the cloud? And is it secure? If you could answer those two questions, you'd be pretty good.
Help me understand one thing. I think in security, every CISO basically wants two things, give me visibility and then help give me a way to fix it. And one thing that's, bugged me is every single security startup I look at seems to have the same messages. We're going to give you visibility and we're going to give you remediation. For everything from cloud security, data security, posture management, agentic security. What made RedLock, how did you convince your first few customers that you actually, had the right solution to come along the journey? How do you break through that noise?
I mean, I think the question is, can you come up with an architecture that helps you evolve to not just where the puck is today, but where the puck will be? And the big bet we made with RedLock, where a lot of our competitors were architected completely to be a single cloud, was we already predicted in 2015, when AWS was still 90% of market share, that most of the world would be multi-cloud. And so the architecture approach we take towards building that is quite different from a vendor that was building towards a single cloud infrastructure. The second piece is we made compliance a first-class part of the product. Because you got to remember, in security,
do people care? I hear compliance and, I feel like I'm okay, how do I actually get somebody to care about this? But yeah.
People care a lot more about compliance because compliance is tied to revenue. Why do you do things for compliance? Why are you going through FedRAMP? Because you want to open up a new revenue opportunity selling to the government. Why do you need to do things to deal with data protection in the EU CRA? Because you want to sell into the European market. So actually, I think it's quite the opposite. Compliance is what starts with first.
Hmm.
Like I've seen so many founders make a mistake in security, which is they're going to want to solve the hardest, most complicated security problem. But if you can't attribute the value of that to compliance, you unfortunately are on the back burner
Hmm.
because the security teams are focused right now on meeting the business where they are and giving the compliance outcomes that they need to drive revenue of the business. So compliance, in my mind, comes first. Well, visibility comes first. Visibility in cyber comes first because that's how a CISO and a security team quantifies the impact and the risks. Without that, they can't, like, it's all a hypothetical conversation. Once I can kind of get visibility into what is my risk, what is my surface area, what is my posture, then compliance comes next. Then comes detection of really advanced security threats, and then comes remediation. That's been my my experience.
So this formula clearly worked for RedLock because it was successful. It was getting repeatability. And I remember at one point you then needed to make a decision between, do you take that next step and go for, I think, what would have been a pretty large Series B at the time,
Yeah.
or get integrated into a large company, Palo Alto Networks, that was looking to be able to make an aggressive move here with someone who at the time I think was a newer CEO still at Palo. How did you make the decision to sell?
So there's a funny story behind that as well. So about 8-9 months earlier, so this is early 2018, Palo Alto Networks reached out to us because they were interested in the market for entering cloud security. We were still relatively young. They chose to buy a competitor of ours.
That's kind of sting.
Who had more in revenue. It did, but we were confident that we had the better architecture. That competitor was a company called Evident.io. Great product, but it was really first class towards AWS and AWS only. And it was very focused on just the compliance piece. The architecture didn't support them to go through the next sequence of detection and remediation and broad multi-cloud visibility. And look, we said, God bless them. They had a great outcome. Kudos to the founders. We kept our heads down. We kept building, and we kept beating them in deals. And then 6 months later, Palo Alto Networks got a new CEO. And a few weeks thereafter, the corporate development team kind of pinged us and said, look, we'd like to talk to you again. I said, you bought our biggest competitor.
Yeah.
I'm not having this conversation. And then they dangled the carrot of, well, we have a new CEO. He would just like to meet you. How about a very casual one-on-one conversation? In parallel, we were doing our Series B. We had already got money in the bank that we subsequently refunded. But the long story short of this is this deal went down really quick. It was entirely negotiated in about a week's time from first meeting with the new CEO.
It's incredible.
It was a big bet for us, but it was an even bigger bet for Nikesh as a new CEO. Like, you're coming in, you're not from cyber, you're coming to a company that just spent several $100 million buying another product. Like, why are you buying two companies in the same exact space?
Yeah.
And he had a lot to prove out. And I'm thankful that he made the bet on a RedLock. But beyond just the architecture and other things, he saw our ability to scale much faster at Palo. Is he understood what it would take to win that market, and that was, you could not think about cloud security with the same sales motion and go-to-market motion as network security, which was the core of Palo Alto Networks.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we'll get into it, but we got an entire opportunity where essentially think of it as Palo Alto Networks was our largest venture capitalist. Nikesh was a chairman of that board, and we were getting funded and fueled to run as fast and hard as we can to win that market.
I want to come to that in a minute because I feel like I'm living that life right now as we think about how do we build out a new set of AI security and agent capabilities here inside of Rubrik. Before that, I am curious. So you've had Palo Alto buy your biggest competitor, and now Nikesh wants to go and meet. What was that first meeting like with the person on the other side? Because I remember the first meeting I had with Bipul, the CEO of Rubrik, who ended up acquiring my startup. We ended up closing down this restaurant after a 45-minute dinner became 3.5 hours. What was your first meeting like on that side?
It was a casual coffee at Rosewood, Sand Hill, and as classic as Silicon Valley and Sand Hill Road gets.
Pretty much.
It was a lot about personal life, upbringing, what motivates us. I think at that point, because they were already in the market, and I can say we were kicking their butts a little bit in the market, selling a better product, that I don't think we had to sell them on why RedLock was the right company, or why our architecture had long-term differentiation, or all the things we could do better. I think they had already had that formed thesis. But in the last 5 minutes of that conversation, I passed by saying, by the way, we're raising our Series B, and I already have that term sheet signed. And, I have a window of 5 business days before, I'm all in that direction or something else.
Yeah.
And, he said, like, look, we'd like to spend more time. And my way of testing if they're serious or just in competitive research
Yeah.
was, great. If you all want to do it, come to our headquarters of RedLock, which was a co-working facility in Menlo Park called Spaces. And literally, believe it or not, 2 days later, the whole executive team of Palo Alto Networks was sitting in a co-working conference room with our curtains shut. That's where a lot of the details were hashed out. So it's kind of crazy how it all panned out.
I've been on the other side of a lot of conversations where, a party, startup is saying something like, hey, we might be raising soon, so this is a time where you want to consider buying. Or, hey, we even have a term sheet. I don't think I've ever seen I have a term sheet already signed at 5 business days to be able to get the transaction done. You were kind of hinting at this earlier, but most acquisitions, I think, end up failing. Like, the acquiring company, like in some way either botches it or it wasn't like a good fit on technology. Culture, I think, breaks down a lot of different areas. It's interesting because I feel like acquisitions should, in a lot of cases, be viewed as like someone has a product, we're going to go buy that product, integrate it, put it on the truck, and sell.
Yeah.
But this was different. Palo Alto is, I think, we're talking 2017 era. Like it's like a network security company, right? Like firewalls and network is what I think everyone knows first party. And now wants to make this massive move towards cloud security. Hyperscalers are going to compete. AWS, GCP, Azure, they're all going to have their own offering. They're all going to say multi-cloud, even if they're not good at multi-cloud. And you have like a whole host of startups within it. Why did Palo Alto succeed in being able to build out the business, which I think eventually became called Prisma, that you were kind of leading, where most of these acquisitions and integrations fail?
So great question. I think first and foremost, there was very clear product market fit and architecture fit for what we had built.
Define product market fit for the audience. And what I'm really curious about is like, how do you know like when you have it or what to be looking for that is product market fit?
Okay, this is going to take us down a very deep end because with AI, I don't think today there's anything called a stable product market fit. I think we're reinventing product market fit and rediscovering it every 6 months.
You have product market fit for at most a quarter.
Yes.
Yeah.
Back then, we had a product that we could go and deploy in POC within an hour. Every POC would typically turn into a pseudo war room when we would leave the company with the visibility that we plugged into to show them just how wonderful their cloud security posture was. That would run into fire drills as a follow-up consequence. Remember, at this time, there was no allocated budget for cloud security, so people had to go find money for cloud security.
Yeah.
And clearly, the stuff we were showing them in a POV was driving them to be able to find that capital. We had incredible customers across media and financial services and high tech, telco. So it wasn't like, oh, we've sold to 10 companies in the Bay Area and they're friends of friends and we're good. Like we actually had repeatable, consistent value derivation, product market fit, repeatability, expansion in accounts. And so now when we go to Palo Alto Networks, I think a lot of kudos goes to Nikesh. He had come from a decade at Google.
Right.
He had learned the one simple thing that unfortunately a lot of enterprise companies lose sight of, which is you need the best product to win. No matter how much fuel you put in sales and marketing, if you don't have the best product, you are not going to win. So that was one. Second was understanding the cultural difference of selling firewalls to IT and security to cloud security architects, and allowing us for the 3 years and a couple of weeks I was there, allowing us to run this with an entirely dedicated sales team, marketing team, customer success team, where we weren't at the mercy of the firewall sellers to go sell what we could with RedLock. And I'd say the third most important thing is once I got acquired, during my 3 years there, we acquired about 9 other companies.
That's insane.
And integrated them into this portfolio with the same mindset that, look, cloud has a very large surface area. There's identity, there's configuration security, there's runtime security, there's Kubernetes. One company can't solve it all well together. And in cyber, it's interesting. People will not trade best of breed for a platform. So we had a thesis. You need best of breed and you need a platform.
Yeah.
So when we decided to go buy some of the companies that we did to expand our portfolio for cloud native security, we actually looked for other startups that had shown breakout success in their categories that we thought would be better suited to be part of a platform than a point solution for Kubernetes and a point solution for identity and such.
What was not obvious being on the other side of the table, making offers for M&A, than when you were in that position yourself at a coffee shop at the Rosewood? Like, what did you learn that most startup founders probably don't know today when it comes towards how companies think about M&A?
Look, Palo Alto Networks has been very generous as a company on making good acquisitions and paying the right multiples for it. I think the biggest thing I can say is if you look at Palo Alto Networks, the core thesis of, look, the reason we're going and buying this company is because even though some team internally at my company can tell me that we can build it in 6 months, it's just, if you haven't done it so far, it's unlikely you'll be able to do it because like clearly this company is out competing us. And the second thing is that founder instinct of whoever is the CEO founder of that company being created as the leader of that module or that component or of that platform, and allowing them to build, because clearly they have outcompeted everybody at our company in trying to build a better solution. So I think that mindset and us pitching that mindset to other founders was really relevant. And I think if you look at it, that is why Palo Alto has such a successful track record of buying, is because they know that integration is not overnight, yet you do need to make that integration, but you don't want to lose the best of breed. So you don't want to trade off best of breed capabilities because you have a nice consolidated dashboard.
Yeah. What's more painful about building a startup inside of a larger organization versus, while you've got your own, let's say, rails to be able to run on?
Look, the big adjustment is when you're a founder, you're just
wondering
a founder.
what you can say.
You're one of one, and you can make a decision and run really fast.
Yeah.
There's an element of strategy and a public company board and a public company financial plan that you need to build around. But I will say the flip side is, as a startup, the hardest thing is, I think 99% of the founders will probably tell us if we talk to them that they think they have the best product and they just can't crack distribution. Distribution is usually the hardest part, right? Like any startup founder sitting there, the conviction is, I got the product, but man, people don't understand it. I can't get in front of enough buyers. Selling is hard. Selling is expensive. I need a lot more capital.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, though, that Palo Alto Networks has, right? They have no distribution. They have a scaled up 50, 60,000 customer base that you can attach to if you have a really good product and you can hyperscale. That is why, we went 0 to 300 million ARR in 3 years for just this product.
It's kind of an insane growth rate if you think about it. I know now with AI, 0 to 300 has become the 12-month story for some of the leading companies, especially with, let's say, the varying margin models that exist. But cloud security felt like the precursor of the wave. Before these massively fast-growing AI companies came out, it was Wiz that everyone was looking at. And before Wiz, it was Prisma Cloud instead of Palo Alto Networks. I feel like for those just asymptotic, like exponential growth curves that we were seeing. And so I think that is, that definitely stands out. Now, thinking a little bit about, I think, the shift towards what you were looking at and seeing that motivated you after, I think, 3 years, 300 million run rate revenue, like from being in Prisma Cloud to then thinking about a whole new set of problems. I think a lot of us, like maybe in the developer platform side, have been like, security is one big thing. But really, security is like so many different modules, from everything from endpoint, network, down to, cloud, code. How did you decide, where to make your next bet? When you're at RedLock, you were betting on the growth of cloud and multi-cloud. And you decided to start a new company. I think it was in 2022, at the beginning or the end of 21. That was like around Endor Labs. Love the name, by the way. I think someone should get some credit for that. How did you decide that this was the space you wanted to tackle next?
Every time somebody asks me how I got the name, I do give you credit.
Okay,
so,
good.
Yes, Dave gets full credit for the name. Look,
I mean, let me just pause there. Isn't it brilliant? Like the planet where you have the shield generator for the. Okay, yeah. So how did you decide that you want to go here?
Summer of 2021, there was a fascinating security breach that happened where a large company called SolarWinds, that thousands and thousands of enterprise IT teams depend on, got compromised. And because their software was compromised, every customer that had deployed that version of software thereby was compromised, and they would give this wonderful name called software supply chain security. And as I kind of start, and really we never talked about that term at scale before, it starts coming to life. We're affected like thousands of other companies are. We start looking into it. And then within 30 days of that incident, another lesser known incident happened where my team was using a GitHub add-on, an app from the GitHub marketplace that they were using for just measuring code quality and code like test automation coverage. That simple little utility had a supply chain incident to them. And essentially, anybody using them, including us, lost our environment variables, all our secrets to our cloud environment and stuff. I'm like, holy moly, like, what is the software supply chain thing? Why is it coming now? What does it mean? It took me down a really deep end of learning about software development to the point of like, we would think the people we hire write most of the code. It turns out, even in 2021, that 70-80% of the code in a modern application was open source. Like our developers are becoming software assemblers, not software developers. And so that was a fascinating kind of insight one. Insight two was, as we sit in enterprise companies, whenever you buy a vendor product like Snowflake, Databricks, whatever, you put them through such a diligence process of security and pen testing and all of this. But anything that we pull off the open source ecosystem, who's paying attention to that? Who are the maintainers? What access do they have? What are their motivations to build good software, secure software, continue to maintain it? We just kind of implicitly trust the whole ethos of open source. And my bet was, actually, the third thing, that everybody for compliance, since compliance is so important, runs a code scanning tool. And an average company has 1 to 3 million findings in their backlog of code security scanners telling them they have some really bad problems in their environment, critical vulnerabilities, high vulnerabilities, and developers do nothing with it because too much noise. If everything's an alert, nothing's an alert. Who's going to take the time to fix it, et cetera, et cetera. Tools were clunky. They were wrong a lot of the times. So I kind of took those three insights and said, there's got to be a better way to solve this problem, especially if we have this massive implicit trust in the code that our developers are not even writing. Like, what's the point of doing background checks and coding exercises for developers when they're just grabbing stuff and utilizing that? And this is way pre-AI, right? This is 2 years pre-LLMs. And so the thesis was that more and more code will not be written by our developers. And as a result, what does software assurance and security look like? And especially, how do I build that without taxing developers? Because the number one tax, and the reason a lot of developers hate security teams in their companies, is because they cause a lot of noise and friction and slowdown. And so, I challenged myself to say, can I build a team and build a technology, which this time was very different from RedLock. RedLock was net new. People had never thought about this problem before, new architecture. Here, it was existing market, clunky market, 2-decade-old products, new ones that are claiming they're DevSecOps, DevOps friendly, but really bad.
Yeah.
And so, that was the thesis behind starting Endor Labs. And, here we are.
So existing market, but one that has changed more than any other market that I can think of over the last decade. You said the word software supply chain security, and my eyes started to glaze over on like software supply chain. I don't actually know what I would consider each of those pieces to be. But then you said software. I think you mentioned this as a thought process in 21 and 22 with the rise of like I think more open source frameworks, but that software was going from being less of a development to more of an assembly. And I think today it's probably like going towards like purely assembly.
100% assembly.
Like, I think I am very bullish on AI. And last week we had who I think is like probably one of the most cracked engineers that I've met, Adam, on the show. And I think he probably hasn't written a line of code himself in at least 2 months.
Yeah,
and I think we're seeing that increasingly overall here. I'm not convinced that the fact that people are not writing lines of code though is making us 10 times more productive yet. I think it should, but I don't think we're seeing the evidence of that just yet in terms of like the velocity of the deployments, especially like I'd say, especially within larger enterprise. Like we have these tools, but would most enterprises say that they're shipping 70% net new features at 3 times the pace?
Yeah.
No. And the flip side of that is Amazon. And I think maybe we can throw this up on the screen, but I think AWS had 4 Sev1 outages in 90 days that they really attributed towards, I'm sure there were better words for it, but I think it was like AI slop, more or less. So a lot more assemblies happening. It's generating a ton of more code. That code now has 2 challenges, both of which boil down to the existing processes don't work. Code review, and I think code security.
Yeah.
Code review is a nightmare. It's either a nightmare or you get, Claude or Codex or one of these other systems to do it.
And pay $25 per PR.
And pay a bunch per
yes,
PR.
if you have that kind of money, yes.
Or it becomes your bottleneck.
Yeah.
And then I think there's the question of, if the models themselves are generating the code, how do you, what's the system that's supposed to secure that?
Yeah.
So what are you seeing in terms of companies has anyone solved this problem? Maybe I should start there. You work with Cursor and OpenAI as two of your customers. If they're shipping code a lot faster than the rest of the tech companies, coast to coast, what are they doing correctly that most aren't?
They're putting the security harnesses and safety harnesses in place in the code generation process.
Spoken like a code security CEO. Yeah.
So let's break this down.
Yeah.
Okay. I get this question a lot. First and foremost, people can't fathom how to even quantify how good or bad is LLM produced code in terms of security.
Great question. I have no idea. My assumption is about as good as a human. Would you say that's roughly right or no?
No. So there's studies that show that AI generated PRs are twice as worse from security perspective than human generated PRs. So that's data point number one. Data point number two, if we can bring it up on screen here, is in December, Carnegie Mellon launched a study where they basically have benchmarked Claude 4 Sonnet. And they said, okay, let's look at functional correctness, and then let's look at security correctness. Mm-hmm. Claude 4 Sonnet was 61% functionally correct in terms of the code production. Take a wild guess. How secure was that code?
How secure was it? I assume that, let's imagine it wrote 100 functions. Hopefully,
percentage of lines of code.
Let's say 80% of lines of code are secure and 20%. 80-20
opposite.
Fair.
10.5% of the lines of code are secure. Okay? So well over 80% of the code is insecure. I know what you're going to ask. So let me explain why that's the case.
Yeah.
And then there's another question. Okay, has this gotten better with Opus 4.6?
Yeah.
And I will tell you why these models, frontier models, release over release are getting 5, 10, 15% better on functionally correct code. They're getting half a point to a point better on security. And so why the mismatch? Look, how are these models trained? They're trained on all the code on the internet, on GitHub, open source. They've learned the good, they've learned the bad, they've learned the ugly. Over the years, over decades, there's lots of vulnerabilities that get found in all of these libraries and versions of code that exist on GitHub, right? But if I start filtering out from my training data set any library that ever has a vulnerability, I wouldn't have a lot of code to train my models on, so I can't really do that. And there's not enough fine-grained information at a line of code and commit level to say, well, what was good and can I correlate was 5 years later was found it's not good and something else might have fixed it. What is that fix? So that level of information and context doesn't exist, so the models don't have that. The second problem is training, as you know, is a really expensive process, multi-billion-dollar process to train models. So let's say models trained in March, and the next training happens in September. Security vulnerabilities are being found by the hour, by the day, and there's just a gap of that knowledge and information. The third thing is a lot of these benchmarks look at writing new code, like can it write new code? The reality of a company, your company here, or any company on the planet, is I got millions of lines of code of existing application context and knowledge and security standards and coding standards. And how do I easily bridge these things together? LLMs are great at grepping through your code base and trying to find things, but they're not clever enough to have a full understanding of your application as a graph, context of your application as a graph, historical knowledge of the last decade of security issues on the internet, how and when they were fixed. That data doesn't exist. It's not easily available.
Why are models worse than humans on this? And I'll just share, I'm so AI pilled that when you said that 11% of the lines of code are generated by an LLM are insecure, my first thought is, oh, the security model must be wrong, not the LLM. And one of the mental models I think we've typically had is that if an intelligent human can do it, if you can feed the model the same context, the model's going to do, approximately the same, and maybe a lot of cases better.
Yeah.
But you're saying that, let's say 80, 90%, or the benchmarks that you're referring to, you're saying 80, 90% of code writing is insecure. I'm guessing that most leading software engineers aren't quite that bad. Why are the models worse than humans at this particular task of generating secure code?
Okay, so there's two different parts of it. One is, why is the code generation itself insecure? I think over time, humans have gotten better at learning what mistakes they make, and they've got their wrists slapped by security teams, and they've had security training.
So we need to get security to be able to slap Anthropic and OpenAI's wrists, like
over time.
Yeah.
But that brings me to the second point, which is why do PRs have more security issues? Because there's not enough humans paying attention to the PRs right now.
For sure.
Like the volume of code, you've noticed this, the volume of code generated by AI is usually more verbose. You could have done that same thing in 20 lines of code that the LLM wrote in 100 lines of code. Volume's increasing. The citizen developers are increasing. I was with the CIO of a very large media entertainment company, and his call to me was, my finance team is writing software in Lovable for building a budgeting and forecasting app.
It's awesome.
Right? Really cool. Amazing. Unlock. But guess what? It has financial data, confidential, non-public data of this company.
Yeah.
So more people are writing code, more lines of code are coming out, and thereby you are getting slop, whether we like it or not. I know we as an industry don't want to talk about it, but there's a lot more slop, and there's very less attention being paid to all of this slop. So to me, as an industry, we are incurring massive technical and security debt that we don't fully grasp and grapple with right now because we're all riding the hype wave. And we should. Please don't take this as I don't believe in this technology. I am pushing my teams every day to go adopt more of this. So the last piece you asked me, what are companies like Cursor and OpenAI and others that use Endor as customers doing? Or what are the best-in-class companies doing to solve this problem? Well, just like you have specialists, I'll give a quick plug on Endor Labs and what we have. We have a platform called Ori. The whole idea of this platform is it's the safety harness for the whole code generation process. So step one, you're using Cloud Code, you're using Cursor, you push the Endor capability into these agents. So in that plan and iterate motion, as a developer is asking the agents to do things or the agents autonomously doing things, we are giving continuous security feedback to the models and making them rewrite the software that is insecure in real time, well before a PR. So the output is when the plan is completed, you have more secure software just by default. And then when it gets to a PR, we're automating the entire process of doing a deep security analysis, architectural analysis, business logic review at a PR. And subsequent to that, if there's new security vulnerabilities that are exposed in remediation workflows, we're using agents, not humans, to fix those things because we're giving them deterministic guidance on what is the problem, how to fix it without breaking your application, and they're really good at following instructions and executing.
Yeah. First of all, I want to cut of anything that comes for Ori via this episode. Second, I think that one thing I've noticed is you said the finance team is building these applications with Lovable. I haven't shipped a feature in years, but I'm out here in Claude Code now building inside of like our actual code base and the product. And there's literally a flag in Claude Code that is dangerously skip permissions.
Yeah.
That flag is so well named that you'd think no one is ever going to use it. Yeah. But I think the reality is people use it all the time. And I think the reality for why people use it is if you go into Claude Code, it's like, hey, I'm going to just start doing, I'm going to go X, Y, I'm going to open a browser window to get around like this MCP restriction that you might have so I can actually click on the buttons. And I'm just out here saying, yep. Like,
you're moving fast.
I'm moving fast. Yeah. The agent can do so much more work if it's not bottlenecked by me. And I just want to see what the end result is. And maybe in my mind, I think I'll go ahead and handle that once it's actually time to push to production. But at the very least, while it's like building its test, like I'm just saying, go. And I think at a certain point, people are probably getting more and more comfortable where some of these actually even like I'm not shipping this to production, right? This is for my own demos, but I'm certain that in some companies and many companies, if people are using Claude Code, they're actually building this way.
Yeah.
The leading model provider companies are skyrocketing revenue off coding as the number one use case that people have found product market fit in. I think we can show like one of these charts here that I think talk about how most of, a lot of the agentic use case in enterprises and organizations is coding.
Yeah.
So this has to be in the crosshairs for the foundation model companies in the labs. And Anthropic actually put out its own code security module. And I think all of cyber probably took like a double-digit hit on the public markets after Anthropic put out that one blog post, right?
Yeah.
And so somebody over there needs to make sure that no sort of trading is happening. But what is the future? Like, I'm actually wanting you to mirror maybe the experience that you saw with cloud security to what we're now seeing from these foundation models. Because you might have thought, I would have thought, that in 2016, 2017, the rise of cloud means that you're going to have cloud security offered as a first-class citizen by the hyperscalers. I would have thought that the best security solutions would come from AWS and GCP and Azure. Yeah. because they're sitting on top of the richest telemetry, the richest data, and the most cross-functional customer knowledge for it.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't the case.
Nope.
Wiz, Prisma, and other cloud security tools, I think, started to dominate. Fast forward to today.
Yeah.
I would almost find myself making a similar argument on should the way that secure code gets developed also be solved by these new hyperscalers, which are the foundation model labs, or is it going to have to be a Switzerland-like player?
Yeah.
What do you think is the future?
Well, first and foremost, if this was an easy problem to solve, you would see the model benchmarks of security, completeness, and effectiveness get significantly better. And we're still at 9-10% secure and safe. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The second thing is keep in mind, 18 months ago, the flavor of the season for AI coding was GitHub Copilot, right? A year to 6 months ago, it was Cursor. And today it's Claude Code. And then there's a long tail of OpenHands and Factory and Augment and Devin. And every enterprise I talk to has a different combination of these flavors. So with security, you always want to build the abstraction and the safety harnesses to be independent of specific technical choices made at specific points of time in a particular company. So that's one, independence. That independence is not only important for support for a vast ecosystem, but it's also just maker checker in security. I mean, even in coding, why do we have somebody write code, somebody else review code? Mm-hmm. You need that level of independence. Like, are you trust the same person who wrote code, which we know is insecure, to now secure it for you? So that's step two. The third piece is configurability. Having a black box that you can press a button and get an output, that output is non-deterministic by nature. Security is a determinism-centric problem by nature, and how regulation and how audits and how compliance treats your findings. You can't go run a code security scan in Anthropic and find 7 things on a Monday and 8 different things on a Wednesday and not be able to explain what's changed. So that's another piece. And the last piece of this is workflow. Like, security is a very deep workflow-centric exercise. There's multiple stakeholders, there's reporting, there's analytics, there's remediation workflows that are custom to every company. And so I always tell people, like, look, just like cloud security, you remember this, I had 24 VCs reject me for a $2 million check for RedLock. And now Google's biggest ever buy is Wiz for $32 billion. It's like, could they have just solved it themselves? Maybe. But like, security is such a specialized field that this is not a YOLO project. A couple guys put a weekend of, tuning some LLMs and getting something done and saying, great, we have a code security thing now.
Yeah.
You don't risk lives in healthcare. You don't risk data and security and breaches in cyber.
Yeah. And I think that these models are going to continue to get better. Just like the hyperscalers got way better.
But and we want to harness that, right? Like, people like us, just like we build faster on the cloud.
Yeah.
We will build better products.
Yeah.
With these LLMs that get better.
Yeah.
But it's not either or. You need the intelligence that is above and beyond the LLM's pay grade, if that was ever such a thing, to put together to bring these end-to-end solutions.
I think I buy the workflow point in particular. I actually think that we're probably going to need a heavy dose of AI to help us secure what AI and agents are doing, because the things are operating in such a fast manner and non-determinism is happening so quickly that I think we can't rely on conventional rules in order to be able to go secure this either. Like, we're going to have to actually look at more advanced pattern matching that we probably won't be able to keep up fast enough. The way I think most of these CVs got found historically were probably like researchers, threat researchers,
accidental.
My guess is like over 3 to 5 years, a majority are going to shift to be model determined and found.
Agreed.
But someone's going to have to figure out what the workflow looks like to be able to plug that in. Yeah. Now, I know we're actually coming up on time, so I just want to ask you a few like fast lightning round questions. The first one that I want to ask is, you say 25, I say 26. Go back to that person who was starting their first company, a little over a decade ago. And what would be the one piece of advice based on what you know now that you'd give to Varun from 25, 26?
Right now, I would say sit it out for 6 months. Don't start anything. There's way too much economic, technical, geopolitical uncertainty out there. It's wild. No, like, in all seriousness, look, I think it's going to be interesting to see how capital and raising takes off, but we're also hearing you can build $1 billion company. And we're seeing with 1 or 2 people.
Yeah.
So yeah, just be scrappy. Like you don't need 20 people, 30 people to go build something meaningful these days.
Yeah.
And if you can prove out that you're that unicorn, like true unicorn that can build a unicorn company with single-digit employee base, I think that's going to be phenomenal.
Yeah.
That's what I would fight for. And I wouldn't spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to go raise the most amount of capital right now.
Every serial founder who's raised a ton of money before or raised a ton of money and also had a big outcome is like, next time, way smaller in terms of the amount of capital I raise and way bigger in terms of the result I deliver. Keep a bigger share of the pie. Yeah. What's something that you know to be true about AI, that you believe in, that you think most of the market does not yet either believe or has not caught up to? Something that you think the rest of the market's underpricing?
We're going to have a period of reckoning. Right now, we are accumulating so much technology and security debt with AI agents writing code that we can't even fathom the impact this will have. AWS is just like a small blip of what we've seen. I think what we're doing right now is putting out Formula One cars without brakes and any safety gear, right? So one of two things will happen. You either can't drive it to its full potential or you're going to wreck it at the first turn.
Yeah.
And I think in order to drive fast, you need to put the safety harnesses in place. And most people are skipping that step.
Yeah. Well, I know you're a huge Formula One fan, so I want to thank you for coming on the show after all the different years and get you a little McLaren hat, which we just sponsored recently.
Amazing.
And this is a fantastic episode. Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
And it was a great conversation. For everybody else who's been watching, I hope you enjoyed this episode, diving deep into company building and the rise of different shifts in the world of cyber and what they're going to mean for AI today. If you liked the episode, give us a comment. If you didn't like the episode, still give us a comment and tell us what you want to hear next time. And until that, we'll be in the details. Thank you very much.